Rod Ovid here with another Take 5, something we bring to you every Monday through Saturday on our Facebook page for Rod Ovid and again for Logos Institute of Biblical Studies. Last time we were together, we shared part 1 in a series we call Impression, Reflect Christ. And it's the story of Elisha. And we began when he was traveling from his home in Gilgal, which is near Jericho, and was going to Mount Carmel. And he stopped halfway through the journey in Shunem. And it says he met a well-to-do woman who was there and urged him to stay for a meal. And he stops, they eat together. She says to her husband, "I know that this man who often comes our way is a holy man of God." And we used that as a springboard, and we talked about our actions and the perceptions that people might have of us, and how important it is to live Christ, not just talk Christ. So we need to have that impression where we reflect Christ. And we spoke of that scenario where she was told by the prophet that she would have a son. She had a little bit of doubt. He said, "Nope, 1 year from now you will have a son," and sure enough, she did. And that's where we left off, and we'd like to pick it up there today. 2 Kings chapter 4, and we'll begin in verse 18. Now we're told that the child grew, and one day he went out to his father, who was with the reapers. My head, he said to his father. His father told a servant, "Carry him to his mother." After the servant had lifted him up and carried him to his mother, the boy sat on her lap until noon, and then he died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, then shut the door and went out. She called her husband and said, "Please send me one of the servants and a donkey so I can go to the man of God quickly and return." "Why go to him today?" he asked. "It's not the new moon or the Sabbath." We see a woman here that is very resourceful. She has to be dying inside. Her son just died, her precious only son. And instead of freaking out and telling her husband and everything, he might just say, "Hey, it's over." She has in her mind that I need to go see the man of God because he promised that I would have a child. So there was something miraculous about that. And I just can't help but believe that there has to be more than these few years with my son. I'm going to see what he has to do about it. So she doesn't even tell the husband that the child died for fear that he might take over and say, "Stay home, we're not doing anything," but just says, "I've got to go see him and I'll be right back." And he says, "Why? It's not the new moon or the Sabbath." And what we know about that is on Sabbath, they would not work and have worship. And on some of the new moons on the Hebrew or the Jewish calendar, they would do the same. Many times they wouldn't work. They would worship or have a festival. And, of course, prophets would be involved in that. So he's a little confused, but nevertheless, she says, "It's all right." And I'll be right back. She saddled the donkey and said to her servant, "Lead on. Don't slow down for me unless I tell you." So she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. Now that's about 10 miles away, because it's about a 20-mile trip from Gilgal, his home, to Mount Carmel, and halfway between is that city of Shunem. Now when he saw her in the distance, the man of God said to his servant, "Look, there's the Shunammite. Run to meet her and ask her, 'Are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is your child all right?'" Now he didn't expect to see her, and he knew if she would be coming out there on her own, something must be wrong. So he sends the servant out to see what's going on. "Everything is all right," she said. When she reached the man of God at the mountain, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi came over to push her away, but the man of God said, "Leave her alone. She is in bitter distress, but the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why." Now, that's very interesting. Taking hold of the feet, this is, I believe, the only time in the Old Testament that this gesture of self-abasement has been used. It doesn't occur anywhere else in the Old Testament. And it's a real show of honor, and yet I'm laying it all at your feet kind of commitment. I'm desperate. And that she was. And again, in this narrative, only as shown here with Elijah, it's just so interesting. It's so real time. He's there. The Lord hasn't showed me. So she begins to speak. Did I ask you for a son, my Lord? She said. Didn't I tell you, don't raise my hopes? Elijah said to her servant, tuck your cloak in your belt, take my staff in your hand and run. If you meet anyone, do not greet him, and if anyone greets you, do not answer. Lay my staff on the boy's face. Now again, very interesting. Tuck in your cloak. It's like gird up your loins. Don't let anything inhibit your moving very, very fast. The longer garments, they would tuck them in their belt, so the lower edge of the cloak wouldn't trip them. And there's no other reference to a prophet being equipped with a staff that we know of in the Old Testament. Moses used a rod, so perhaps he thought that God would transfer power through that staff at his request. And he says, go do this. Put it on the child's face. So evidently he knew by this time that his head was the part that was hurting. And so he's going for a direct healing on the face or head of this boy. But the child's mother said, as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you. So he got up and followed her. Gehazi went on ahead and laid the staff on the boy's face, but there was no sound or response. So the servant went back to meet Elijah and told him, the boy has not awakened. When Elijah reached the house, now mind you, this is a 10-mile trip again, there was the boy lying dead on his couch. He went in and shut the door on the two of them and prayed to the Lord. Then he got on the bed and lay upon the boy, mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands. As he stretched himself out upon him, the boy's body grew warm. Elijah turned away and walked back and forth in the room, and then got on the bed and stretched out upon him once more. What a narrative this is. Again, details like this we just do not read in other portions of the Old Testament. His procedure's very interesting. He lays upon him as if there's going to be some transference of vitality or life force. But I have to believe that he had enough experience with God, that he knew what his limitations were and had his own procedures down. And this was his way of communicating to God that I really need you to do something here. This isn't me. I'm just going to lay on him, and I'm just going to ask you to just use your power to heal this boy. Now he starts to get warm, and we see the prophet get up, and he walked back and forth in the room. Then he got on the bed a second time. And maybe you ask yourself, I know I did when I read this early on, why didn't it work the first time? Why is he walking back and forth? He's pacing. And it reminds me of when Elijah, his predecessor, was waiting on water, waiting for the rain to come. And he was so nervous. He had to have a servant look, and he looked, 7 times to see if the rain was coming. And I think what that tells you and me is that everything isn't as pat as we think it is. That we have to be very careful when we start demanding things of God, or we think it's going to go a certain way. We have to be humble about it, and we have to be 100% sure that it's God doing it and not us. And I think sometimes it stretches out a little bit just to teach us who's in control. It's not our incantations. It's not his body on top of this boy that's doing it. God's going to do the healing. And if it's not working right away, you get up and you pace back and forth and you pray a little more earnestly and you say, God, you need to do this. And I think there are times that we need to have that kind of wake-up call. We have far too many formulas in modern evangelicalism. We're programmed to death with 5 steps to this and 6 steps to that, and life just isn't that simple. Life just isn't that neat and clean. It's messy. And we need God to sort it out. And we need to be desperate before him and pace back and forth sometimes in earnest belief, and yet fully understanding you're God and I'm not. So he gets on the son one more time, and it says this time the boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Now, the language is a little odd at this point. The word translated sneezed occurs only here, and the meaning is a little uncertain. From the context, there is possibilities that it might include convulsed or moaned, not necessarily a sneeze. But whatever it was, he awakened. And so Elijah summoned Gehazi and said, "Call the Shunammite." And he did. And when she came, he said, "Take your son." She came in, fell at his feet, and bowed to the ground. Then she took her son and went out. What do we learn from this? We learn that we serve a miraculous God, and that when we claim to follow him, when we leave the impression that we are God's children and servants, we have to be very careful to keep our ego intact and make sure it doesn't become our show, but God's. And I believe that day Elisha sighed with relief as much as the mother, and saying, "Lord, I don't know. You didn't tell me about this. It didn't work out clean and simple. It was messy, and yet you did a miracle. Thank you, God." And there are times that the road might be rough, but we need to hang tough and watch God. So you think about these things. Look at your life. Look at the things happening around you. If it's messy, pray about it. Lay down on it, hand to hand, mouth to mouth, and ask God to do a miracle. And if you have to get up and pace a little, then pace, and then get back again. And believe and expect great things as we go through our life, and expect these things and watch God work. We will certainly have blessed days.